Welcome to this Gluware tutorial on the topic of using the Config Drift and Audit app to run various configuration audits. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through running 3 different audits that you can follow along with using the Gluware test drive. First, we'll go through running a standards-based compliance audit. Next will be a company policy audit. And third will be an ad hoc security audit. So for more information about the test drive, please visit gluware.com/test-drive. In the Device Manager tutorial video, we covered the administrative tasks that have already been set up for you to run the test drive. So as a reminder, the role-based access you have been given is as an operator, so you will not be able to perform certain admin functions or edits, but you will be able to run the audits provided in this tutorial. So I'm going to log back into my Gluware control instance with my credentials, as you will be doing on your system. And we're going to navigate back into the Config Drift and Audit application. Come in back into the application with the view of the network nodes or devices that you have in your system. Navigate to the audit functionality. There are 2 options. One is you can click this button here, which is to view your audit policy. And another probably more handy way to toggle between the 2 is there is a floating bar option here you can pin that makes it easier to toggle between your device view and the audit policy. So once you have that bar pinned, you have 2 icons. One is for your Device Explorer, which you're looking at, and the second is the Audit Policy Explorer. So once you've clicked on that, you're going to see the audit policies that are available in your system. And as mentioned, as an operator, you're able to run these policies. However, you'd have to have higher credentials to go ahead and edit them. The one we're going to run first, and one of the most common use cases with running audit in Gluware, is standards-based audits for compliance purposes. So we're going to double click on this audit policy that came out of the NIST organization. And once you've double clicked on that, go up to your top bar and click on the details button to view the policy. So here in the description, you're seeing that this particular specification came out of the NIST organization, and it is published as part of the DoD's information systems, and the nickname of this one is called the STIG, Security Technical Implementation Guide. And so what a Gluware policy is made up of is rules that use native vendor CLI with regex. And these rules are required statements, and if I scroll down here, forbidden statements. So here in the required statements, I can see this particular one is requiring an inbound access control list. And if I look over on the side here, I have a rule name, any description that goes along with it, operating system used for scoping. This happens to be a Cisco iOS, so I could scope it to Cisco iOS. Any concept items, this is not going to be covered in this tutorial. And then finally, scope is telling our engine to look into certain specific areas of the configuration. In this case, it's looking at those Ethernet interfaces. So as I scroll down, you're going to see these forbidden statements. So these are pretty straightforward. These are just statements that should not be used based on the security specification. And same here. So I think the only thing mainly to understand around the defining a policy, if you're coming in and creating one yourself, is to understand how the regex works. And for that, I recommend you go off and look at that. There's a helpful utility out there that is online called Regex 101. With Regex 101, you can copy in statements that are using regex like this, and you can copy in your configuration and see how it's working. In this case, we're just basically telling it to wildcard or ignore the actual ACL number here that is as being called, since that's not part of something hard-coded that's required. So that's pretty much the long and short, a quick overview on defining a audit and the policies that it's made up of. And now once the audit is, you're happy with the audit in terms of running it, you go back to the Device Explorer view. So you can either, again, click on the node here, this icon of the node, or you can jump back over to this view here. And if I select these Cisco nodes here and I highlight them, I can then choose the icon to run a configuration audit. So there's a few options here. One is basically saying, what devices. So I'm going to run on my current devices. If I want to use the snapshot of the configuration that's already been performed or capture a new one. I know in my case, I've run new snapshots today, so we have current configurations. And then finally, what policy do we want to run? We're going to start with running the DoD STIG policy. I'll select that one, and I can either schedule it to run periodically or I can execute it immediately. So we're going to choose the Start Audit, and you'll be able to follow along with this in your test drive. So it's executed the audit with 8 devices. There were no errors, but I can see there's a lot of violations. So when I view results, it gives me my devices that have violations, tells me the number of violations, and then I can expand a device and see exactly what it's missing. This is missing very specific configuration around enabling SSH and potentially disabling, Telnet, requiring an IP address and an inbound ACL, disabling HTTP services. So I can see exactly what is, what are the violating configurations, what rule, and what is being violated, and therefore I can go and take action. So, here, config audit component is read-only, same with config drift. So there's a read-only aspect to actually execute an audit and then determine how you're going to take action. Most Gluware users move on to then automate configuration and config modeling and fix issues that have to be addressed. So that concludes use case 3A here, which is the standards-based audit. Now let's look at something a little different. So I'm going to go back to my browser here, and the second most common use case that we hear from customers is auditing for the customer or their own standard-based policy. So what I'm going to do is double-click on Standard Global Audit, and this particular audit corresponds with the next step when we get to config modeling. So what you can see here in terms of standard globals, and this again also is a pretty simple example of an audit policy. I'm requiring banner to be configured. I'm requiring a name server to be configured, and the actual IP address, it's not specified. I'm requiring NTP to be configured, and again, I'm using regex to wildcard out the NTP server IP. I'm requiring SNMP, public and private strings, to be included. And that's really the extent of a very basic audit. So again, what I'm going to do is audit the nodes in my network. So if we remember what we just did during a previous use case when we created drift, we actually also created a violation of this audit. So without giving you any more hints, we're going to go ahead and run this audit. So I'm going to toggle back to the device view. We're going to execute this audit, and I'm going to just execute it on all the iOS XE devices. And we're going to say execute this audit by clicking that button again. Again, the selected devices, the policy is going to be Standard Globals Audit, and I'm going to execute that audit. So as I expected, I have one violation, one device and one violation. So when I view those results, if you remember, in the last use case, or when we created a drift, we disrupted the configuration by deleting the NTP server. So not only was that caught in the drift application of a config has changed, but if I'm auditing for standard policy and I require that configuration, the audit engine will flag it as well. As we move forward and we go into config modeling and we're automating configuring of NTP, we're going to expect that the drift occurrence goes away, as well as this audit should be cleared as well. So that's how we kind of tie things full circle here. So at that point, we conclude use case 3B, which is running a standards-based company audit, in this case auditing for globals. Moving on to the next audit, we want to audit for an ad hoc security issue. Okay, so this is, the vendor issues a security advisory, and now I have to search across my devices to figure out if I have it or not. So to show you something a little bit different, I wanted to show you how these audit policies are portable. So you won't be able to do this in the test drive system, but you will have this audit policy already in your list. So I'm going to select Import Policy, and then I'm going to import it from a file, format these in JSON. So here's the policy I've been shared with me. So I open it up and I select OK. So now this policy is in the list. It's called Cisco HTTP Vulnerability. Now when I double click on it and I go into the edit, I can see this is actually a very simple audit policy. I'm specifying that the HTTP services and HTTP secure services should be disabled on a given Cisco iOS device to essentially close a security hole that was highlighted from a pcert. So here's my audit. So once again, I view my nodes. I have all the iOS devices selected. I run the audit, and I'm going to select the Cisco HTTP vulnerability and hit start. And I can see, essentially all my devices are violating this. So all these 7 devices are violating these configurations. And as I double click in here or look at it and look across these devices, all of these actually do not have this command which closes that gap or that hole. So if I was concerned about that vulnerability, I would pretty quickly have to determine if I need that feature turned on for some reason, and if I don't, go ahead and close it by disabling the HTTP server and secure server on those devices. So that concludes use case 3C, and that also concludes this tutorial. So thanks again for your time. We hope you continue on with your test drive.